Hey, what's up guys, Hans here. In today's video, I want to share with you just how profitable my self-storage business actually is. In particular, I will dig deeper into how much money I actually made with my side hustle last year in 2021, and I will tell you why I think setting up your own self-storage business is the most passive income stream you can set up for yourself. Make sure to stay until the end of the video, as I will be showing important tips on how to make the business even more passive so you can concentrate on, watching Game of Thrones or focus on other investments. So let's go. Alright guys, let's get it started. As you might have heard me talked about before, I have been running a side hustle in which I rent out storage space. In particular, I'm using standard shipping containers, which I have put onto the two properties which I do rent myself. And now you might be thinking, how does that actually work? How much money do you make with it? And how much time do you have to put in? Thus, how passive is the income? And those are excellent questions. So let us dig deeper into that. Before we start, let me just remind you that I have extensively talked about my side hustle before. And if you're interested in that, check out this video here. If you're interested in this subject, I highly recommend watching it, as I'm laying out the exact steps you have to take to be able to set up your own self-storage business. But first, let's rewind. Let me tell you a bit how this business actually works. As I said before, I'm renting out these shipping containers on two properties, which I also rent myself. On these rented properties, the containers are just sitting on the ground and thereby being stationary and not mobile and not attached to any wheels or anything. The containers are thus accessible at any time, and the renters can just go to the property and store almost whatever they want in these containers. Similar to a regular real estate property, I then receive the rent each month. But before we get to the insane profitability, which I will talk about later on in this video, let me just elaborate on a few more important things. I currently own 21 shipping containers, mostly so-called 20 or 40 foot long containers, but also smaller ones. Now, before you say anything, I obviously have not started out with 21 containers, but with a lot less, with 2 containers to be precise, and then subsequently got more and more. And this is a really important point, as it highlights the modular nature of the business itself. Putting aside how you actually get and finance these containers, you can start off with just one container and then subsequently get more and more containers. It's not like you have to put in an insane amount of money or resources such as time to get your business started. It can literally be done in the matter of just a few days, and you can get rewarded for it immediately. And also, you don't need any special skills for this. I mean, look at me. Jokes aside, this is a very valuable point, so keep this in mind. Even when you think about how you can get and purchase the containers, there are just so many options, and I'm sure you can also get a small consumer loan for that, so you don't even have to put in the money at first. And therefore, you're able to start this business even without any money and upfront costs. Once your business grows and you can invest more and more of your money, and I will also talk about the break-even point later on in my video, you can just get more containers and thus expand your business in a modular way. Aside from the financial benefits of this business model, the modularity aspect of it is probably the most important benefit of it. Now, let's talk about what kind of work and especially how much work you have to put in for this side hustle. As some of you know, for me, this is still a side hustle, as I am working full-time as a strategy consultant here in Germany. And thereby I just do this sort of on the run. And therefore I cannot even spend much time on this business. But for simplification, let's just make a few assumptions. Let's say you have already dealt with the bureaucratic stuff, such as setting up your company in the respective municipality. As this obviously varies from country to country and also municipality to municipality, I'm not going to elaborate on this further, except from adding that it probably took me roughly 30 minutes to set my company up over in Germany. Also, let's assume that we are getting and renting out a 20-foot container, not the 40-foot long container, for which you might have to get a larger crane. So let's discuss the individual steps first. Let's start off with the most difficult and also most time-consuming part of this business. Obviously, you need an appropriate property on which you can put these containers. For this, you can either buy a property, which might not be what you will actually do at the beginning of your business, or you just rent a property yourself. And I highly recommend doing that at the beginning to get used to it all and to just test the demand for storage space in your area. And that is also what I did. I started off with renting a property from a friend of mine. It wasn't a big property. It was roughly 350 square foot or 30 square meters. So really just a small property. And that was ideal for me, as I was able to fit 2 standard-sized 20-foot containers on this property and to test the demand. Now, I know that most of you out there don't have a friend whom you could just ask whether you could put a container on his or her property. So let me just illustrate how I found my second property, which I'm also renting myself, and how this might be a good option for you as well. I found the second property by researching on a website similar to Craigslist. As some of you know, I'm originally from Germany, so I have been using the local version of it over here in Germany. On the site, I regularly search for certain keywords, which I will get to in a second, and this is very important. Oftentimes you find huge properties which you can rent, however, they are just way too big when you want to start off with the business. Therefore, I recommend finding a property which is anywhere between 50 and 100 square meters or 500 and 1000 square foot to start off. But who would rent out such small areas? Exactly. Someone who rents out space for RVs, boats and cars. Therefore, try to look for ads which promote that. You will find these ads by looking on Craigslist or any other website by searching for RV parking spot or parking lot or boat parking or whatever. Then just contact the person who published the ad and ask him or her whether, instead of parking an RV or boat, whether you could just place containers on his or her property. And that is exactly how I found my second property. Now, as I said before, finding the appropriate property is probably the most difficult and also time-consuming part of the business, especially in the area in which I am here in the south of Germany, as there's hardly any commercial space left available. Therefore, you will have to search regularly on a site like Craigslist and search for these properties. However, this is also a task which can be done each evening on your phone, for example, and probably will not require more than 5 or 10 minutes each day until you find a suitable one. So let us guesstimate on how much time you or I would spend on doing that. Let's say I do that for 5 minutes each day for 4 weeks, and it probably won't even take that long. Again, this depends on the area. So 5 times 7 equals to 35 times the 4 weeks, hence roughly 2.5 hours overall. Also, when you found the property, you will want to have a look at it first, talk to the owner and so on. So let's say this takes an additional 10 hours. Even then, you've only spent 12.5 hours on finding the right property. And this is really the foundation of your business. And I know it's hard at the beginning, but make sure to invest some time into this step. Now, let's think about the next step. Obviously, then you have to get the container. That means that you buy the container either from a dealer or from a private seller, such as someone from Craigslist, and get the container shipped to you. Finding a dealer or seller who doesn't screw you over is not going to take you very long. I would just contact several sellers or dealers and let them make you an offer. Let's say this probably takes you another 2 hours. Then if you've bought and paid for the container, it eventually gets delivered to your preferred location. For this, you really should be on the site, and depending on the circumstances, make sure that the ground is leveled and that the container is a bit elevated from the ground. For example, and I will show you a picture of this here, I have often used wooden beams or stone slabs. Once this is prepared, the container gets delivered via a small truck with a crane on it. Let's say this initial setup takes you another 2 hours. Also, you then have to get a lock for your containers, and I will link the one I always use down below in the description, and get it delivered to your doorstep. Let's say this ordering process takes you another 30 minutes, and then your business is technically ready to generate income after just 12.5 plus, we said 4.5 hours, so 17 hours of work. Lastly, you just have to find a suitable customer who wants to rent out your storage space. For this, you also set up an ad on Craigslist or any other website. Again, watch my previous video, which I will also link below in the description to find out more about how you can actually attract the right customers. For setting up the ad, you can use a stock image of, let's say, shipping containers, and then obviously describe the conditions, such as the amount of rent, the minimum renting period, the exact location, etc. Even if you're slow with that, it's probably not going to take you longer than 30 minutes. And then once you've found the right customer, you just have to set up a contract with him or her. If you're interested in what such contract might look like, hit me up in the comment section below. Also, hit the subscribe button to not miss out on any of my videos. In particular, I will also make a separate video describing the exact contract which I use myself. So also hit the bell button to receive notifications whenever I upload a new video. But let's get back to the topic. Let's say you get a regular storage space rental contract from Google, and you type in the needed information such as the contact information, monthly rent, and so on. This copy and paste action and creating the PDF, which you then send to the renter for him or her to sign, will probably not take you longer than 10 or 15 minutes. So overall, based on the assumptions mentioned earlier, you need less than 20 hours to set up your first container and thus the foundation of your business. Obviously, the time you might actually need for this will vary, but this calculation should give you a nice indication of how much time you would have to put into. Now, in the last few minutes, we have talked about the initial setup of the business. But wait, once the containers are already on the property and you just have to get a new renter, for example, because the old one doesn't need the storage space anymore, how much time is then needed? Well, to answer this question, let's just think about the individual steps again. You don't have to order the container. You don't have to be on the site to prepare the delivery. You only have to find a new customer and set up a new contract with him or her. And we said this process takes how long? 15 to 20 minutes, exactly. As I mentioned before, I currently have 21 shipping containers on my 2 rented properties. Once a renter doesn't need the space anymore, he or she will notify me 6 weeks in advance, which gives me enough time to find a new renter. For this, I just copy and paste the saved information from previous ads into a new ad on Craigslist. Then I wait for the potential customers to contact me, and when we come to an agreement, we set up the contract. For this process, I hardly put in any time and effort, and the best part of it all, I can do it fully remote. I don't have to be near the property, not even for the handing out of keys, as I'm using this lockbox, and you might have seen these before at Airbnbs, for example. The old renter can just put in the keys for the container, and the new one comes and then takes the keys out of the lockbox. And then another regular task is to check whether the renters have actually paid their rent. So in summary, once the containers are on your property, the business is almost fully passive, and you don't need to be anywhere near the property. As we have discussed just now, you need less than 20 hours of, let's call it initial or one-time time invested, and then just 10 to 15 minutes of recurring time invested when you get a new renter. And to make this a bit more precise, let's have a look at how much time I have roughly spent in 2021 with this side hustle. Now, the exact time I spent on this probably differs a bit. However, again, I think this really gives you a good indication of how much time I have put in and how much time you will have to expect to be put in. So let's just jump into the Excel sheet, shall we? So what you can see here is my Google Sheets spreadsheet on which I just track how much money I'm getting in, meaning how much money the renters are paying me each month. So what you can see here on the left are the different containers which I have, as I said before, 21 overall, and I just named them 40 foot, 20 foot, or small container, or insulated container, or whatever. Doesn't really matter for now. So how's the sheet set up? You can see the individual transactions or rent which I get, and then it is summed up on the bottom here in green. Overall, you can see that I made roughly 21 or a bit more than 21,000 euros in revenue in 2021. You can see that the rent which I get from the different containers varies a bit. It also obviously depends on the different sizes. So what you can see from this spreadsheet is that in February I had 9 containers, and then in March I got an additional 8 shipping containers delivered to my properties, which I then also rented out and for which I have obviously collected the rent. And then lastly, in April or May also, I have gotten an additional 4 shipping containers, which I have then also rented out. So now let's just calculate how much time I needed to set up these 12 additional shipping containers in 2021. So based on the calculations we did before, let's say I needed 4.5 hours per shipping container times the 12 shipping containers which I got in 2021, means that I spent roughly 54 hours in installing and getting these additional 12 shipping containers ready for renting them out. However, it should also be mentioned that I hardly ever just get 1 shipping container. I usually get 2 of them together, which obviously reduces the time I needed to install these shipping containers to half of that. So I would say roughly 27 hours in 2021. And then to attract the respective customers, I set up the ads on Craigslist, which I'd say took me roughly 3 hours overall for these 12 shipping containers. And then lastly, I mentioned that you also have to check whether you actually got the money or the rent transferred to your bank account. So let's say this took me another 15 minutes for each month. Obviously, this is a really smooth and easy process. You just log into your bank account and check whether they have actually transferred the money. So for each month, this took me, I'd say, 15 minutes. If you add that up, it equals to roughly 3 hours of work for the whole year. So to summarize, if you add that up, I had to put in an initial 27 hours to set up the 12 additional containers. I then spent 3 hours finding the right customers and setting up these ads. And then lastly, I have spent 2 hours on checking whether I have actually received the rent. So overall, I'd say that I spent roughly 32 hours in 2021 for this business. Now, after having talked about how much time I had to put in 2021 into this business, let's have a look at the revenue which I generated in this year. As you can see in the video, my business generated a revenue in 2021 of roughly 21,000 euros. Now, if you deduct the rent which I'm paying for the 2 properties and also the small accessories such as locks and anything else, I made a profit of roughly 15,000 euros. Now, if you compare these 32 hours which I spent initially in 2021 to these 15,000 euros in profit, you notice that this is actually a really passive income and that I don't have to put in much work for this. Now that my containers are set on these 2 properties, I spend an average of 15 minutes per month to just check whether the rent is being paid. So in consequence, I estimate that I need roughly 3 hours to check whether the rent is being paid for this year, for 2022. And in consequence, as I mentioned several times now, the business is really passive and might be among the most passive businesses you can set up for yourself to generate a really passive income. Now, let's just briefly touch on the break-even point, meaning at which level do the total revenues equal the total expenses. Now, as I've talked about in my previous videos, you can buy shipping containers used, for example, for roughly 1,000 euros, anywhere up to 2,500 euros if they are in a really good condition, let's say from a dealer. Now, most of my shipping containers, I do rent them out for like 100 euros per month, and the rent which I have to pay for one shipping container for the rented property is roughly 30 euros. So if you subtract the 30 euros which I myself pay for rent for the property from the 100 euros I make in revenue, you notice that I make roughly 70 euros in profit. Now, on average, I would say that I spend roughly 1,700 euros per shipping container to get them delivered to my property. So if you then divide the 1,700 which I pay for the shipping container and for the delivery by the 70 euros which I make in profit off of one shipping container, we get to roughly 24 months, and that means that I need 24 months for the shipping container to be paid off by the revenue it generates itself. So in consequence, the break-even point is just really low. If I rent out these shipping containers for 2 years, they're basically paid off completely. And then you can also do a lot more financial tweaks and twists, such as financing your shipping containers so you don't have to put any money in at first at all, but I will not dig deeper into this at the moment. This will be subject to another video, which will be coming out in the next weeks. Now, let's quickly talk about another important point. After having set up these containers, how can running this business be made even more passive, thus reducing the amount of time you still have to put in? And there are basically 5 subjects which I will quickly just touch on. The first one is checking the bank transfers, which we talked about, making sure that you actually get the money by your renters. The second one is organization. The third one is this transition process from the old customer to a new customer. The fourth one is security cameras. And the last one is just getting assistance. So let's dig deeper into that real quick. Instead of checking whether your renters have actually paid their rent for each month, just make the customers pay rent 6 months in advance. With this, you only have to check your bank account twice a year. And this also makes writing invoices, for example, or finalizing your tax returns much easier, as you don't have to look into that many individual transactions. The second point is organization. By organizing important information and documents, for example, for your Craigslist ads, in the right way, you spend less time setting up these ads and contracts and thus save time. You can easily reduce these items, such as the contracts or the pictures or whatever text you use for ads, and by this you obviously reduce the time spent. Now, the third aspect I quickly want to highlight is this transition period when the old customer leaves and the new customer comes in. Imagine the current customer doesn't need the storage space anymore and terminates the contract with you. Whenever the renting period ends, the customer has to hand back the keys for the shipping container. For this, just use lockboxes, so that the old customer can just leave the keys behind and the new customer can just come and get the keys from the lockbox. And I will post a link of these in the description. If you use these lockboxes, you then don't have to go to the property each time a new renter comes in, thus saving you additional time. But obviously keep in mind that both the old and the new customer need the code for the lockbox. The fourth aspect is security cameras. And now you might be thinking, why does adding security cameras lead to me saving time? And this is easy to answer. Every once in a while, you just want to have a look at who's on your property. For example, to make sure that no one leaves behind any trash, or just for you to check who steps on your property. And for this, it's obviously less time consuming to just check that on your phone so that you don't have to drive to the property. And I will link the cameras which I'm currently using on my 2 properties in the description below. Lastly, as with any other business, you can make your business more passive by getting assistance. For example, from another freelance who supports you in certain processes. For example, your assistant or freelancer could support you whenever a new container gets delivered to your property. He or she could scout for new properties and so on. But obviously, this also increases your expenses. And as this is a no-brainer, I will not elaborate further on this point. Overall, there are many steps which you can take to make your business more passive, even though it already is very passive. Now, let me know in the comments, have I missed anything? What else could be improved to make the business more passive? Hit me up in the comments below and let's discuss these interesting topics. Now, before we end this week's video, I'm thinking about creating a handbook which would guide you through the individual steps and processes you would have to go through if you would open up and set up your own self-storage business. For this, also let me know in the comments whether you would be interested in that and whether you would like to receive such a guide. And also, if you do have any questions, just post them down below. Alright guys, that's it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did like it, make sure to hit the like button below, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you guys next time. Take care. Bye.